What could cause a legal genius, someone who earned a doctorate in law at the age of 16, to abandon everything to become a shepherd of poor souls? What touched the heart of Saint Alphonsus Maria de Liguori so deeply that it led him to step away from the light of prestige and enter the quiet path of mercy? From that profound conversion, one of the outstanding figures of the Church emerged. He founded the Congregation of the Most Holy Redeemer, wrote masterpieces such as Moral Theology and the Glories of Mary, and became the Doctor of Mercy. That journey not only transformed his own century, but also left a guiding light for the Church to this day. Before beginning, leave an Amen in the comments to join in communion of prayer. Do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel to see more moving stories about the saints. Every like and comment you leave is a small act of sharing that helps the video reach more people, so we can contemplate the lives of the saints together and be inspired to live more holy lives each day. The dawn settled over the city of Naples at the end of the 17th century like a carpet of light spread across old stone streets, where the sound of church bells blended with the rhythm of a city both splendid and restless. Proud palaces, crowded squares filled with passers-by, and harbors where ships arrived, carrying the echoes of Mediterranean cultures, all created the scene of a world in transition. Within that prosperity, Naples also carried the fractures of its age. Religious debates, the spread of rationalism, the divide between rich and poor, and pastoral issues left unresolved, pushed the city into a moment both flourishing and fragile. This was the place where God quietly prepared a soul for a mission that would reach beyond the limits of the visible horizon. Amid that setting, in 1696, an infant was born into the noble family of the de Liguori lineage. His name was Saint Alphonsus Maria de Liguori. From that moment, a story began to take shape, not through the glory of his lineage or the power of the world, but through the mysterious plan of God for a chosen soul. The city of Naples welcomed him with radiant morning light, as though heaven and earth had prepared a halo to surround the life of the future saint. In an elite environment where art, learning, and discipline were considered foundational, Saint Alphonsus still carried within himself a deep interior sensitivity that surpassed the ordinary measures of aristocratic society. He grew up under the care of his family, educated through the finest methods of the time. Yet beneath hours spent with philosophy, law, and music, under candlelight, reflecting on the pages of his books, one could notice something unlike other children. Saint Alphonsus possessed a remarkably sharp intellect. Before reaching 20, he could read and understand complex philosophical texts and interpret the law at a level many adults hesitated to approach. In music, he revealed a refined capacity to perceive the inner beauty of each melody. All these things did not merely speak of natural intelligence, but opened a hidden depth where God was planting the seeds of a great mission. That intellectual brightness was not kept for his family alone or used to pursue the ambitions of his age. It was like an inner flame longing for something beyond worldly splendor. Though he lived in luxury, the soul of Saint Alphonsus reached toward a greater truth, a calling not yet spoken, but strong enough to become a silent driving force. His relatives saw his eagerness to study and explore, but he himself sensed within a door opening toward another world, where intellect would not only distinguish right from wrong in legal matters, but would understand the human soul in the light of God. Looking at the early years of the saint, one sees how God seemed to place in him all the elements needed for a life of service. The wisdom to grasp the complexities of humanity, the sensitivity to perceive the hidden suffering of society, and a heart alive to the movements of truth. The childhood years of Saint Alphonsus passed within that quiet preparation, like each dawn arriving in Naples to remind the city that light never fades, even when the darkness of the age settles in. And so, the opening question of the entire journey slowly appears as a whisper from the realm of mystery. What made God choose an extraordinary intellect, a contemplative soul, someone born into honor, and transform him into an instrument of mercy for the poor and the sinner? That question opens like the first door leading into the spiritual path that Saint Alphonsus would fully live, a path that began with the light of Naples, but would reach the distant places waiting to be touched by the redeeming love. The final years of the 17th century and the early years of the 18th stretched over the city of Naples like a symphony woven from order and upheaval. Within that symphony, the life of Saint Alphonsus Maria de Liguori entered a radiant stage of intellect, as if God were awakening the deepest potentials of a chosen soul. From his youth, he became a subject of conversation among noble families, in academies, and among those who cherished learning. A strange natural talent was revealing itself, both brilliant and humble, like the first light of dawn quietly shining through the windows of the ancient city. At only 16 years old, Saint Alphonsus achieved a feat that astonished the scholars of Naples, the degree of Doctor of Civil and Canon Law. In that era, it was nearly unimaginable for a teenager to reach such a level. The masters of law regarded him with admiration, and those who witnessed it saw in this the first sign of an intellect that exceeded ordinary bounds. God placed within him the ability to understand and analyze like a flame that swiftly caught onto every complex issue. In the family library, where leather-bound volumes filled the wooden shelves, the young Alphonsus spent long nights reading, taking notes, and pondering as if knowledge were the path that divine will intended to lead him along. From knowledge to practice, that talent shone even more brightly in the courts of Naples. Before he was even 20, Saint Alphonsus had become a phenomenon among lawyers. He won more than 30 major cases with sharp reasoning, meticulous preparation, and an ability to perceive the heart of a matter at the point where others had yet to see it. Counts, merchants, and powerful families sought him out for defense. In each trial, Alphonsus stood tall in the light, streaming through the high windows, his voice calm and steady, his eyes composed with the gaze of one who could discern the spirit of the law hidden behind each line of text. Yet, in the midst of those continuous successes, a quiet movement began to form within the soul of Saint Alphonsus. Truth and justice were the goals he pursued, but it became increasingly clear that the courtroom was not where the longing in his heart could be answered. He sensed a sacred emptiness between the applause of the people and the praise of the judges. The rhythm of renown could not fill that quiet call. On Via Medina, where crowds passed constantly, he often slowed his steps, as if pondering something beyond the disputes of victory and defeat. The light of intellect, no matter how strong, was not enough to answer this movement. Saint Alphonsus realized that his soul was touching a new boundary, where truth was not determined only by knowledge, but by a deeper encounter. This was not doubt, but openness. The glory of the courtroom was like a radiant crest of a wave, but beneath it were countless currents leading him toward another shore. He often went to pray in small churches around the city. In the flickering candlelight, amid the evening prayers, the figure of the young lawyer lingered long before the Blessed Sacrament. At times he stood there like a student, like one seeking the whispered voice of God. One day his gaze rested on the crucifix, and a quiet thought arose. The justice of the courtroom judges actions, while the justice of God reaches the soul. And then, amid that series of resounding victories, God prepared what no one could foresee. The successes of youth were arranged like stones along a path, forming a foundation for him to face an approaching event. It would be a turning page, a change not only of profession, but of the entire direction of his life. The triumphs of the courtroom, though glorious, were becoming the prelude to a profound conversion. In the depths of his soul, Saint Alphonsus sensed this quiet preparation. God lit within him a gift that would later become the heart of his spirituality, seeing truth in the light of love rather than only through the cold clauses of law. Each victorious case would no longer be merely a sign of talent, but a stepping stone, leading to a great encounter between a person and the one who calls from within silence. Like dawn opening after night, the youth of Saint Alphonsus rose with all the beauty of an intellect refined by God. But that dawn also held beneath it gentle clouds, signaling a change of season. All the bright points of this period, from the doctorate in law to the courtroom victories, were the movements of a pre-written composition, leading him to the place where human light meets the light of God. And at that meeting point, the next chapter of his life would open, leading Saint Alphonsus into the journey of conversion that God had prepared from the beginning. While the youth of Saint Alphonsus Maria de Liguori was advancing on the summit of prestige, the city of Naples witnessed an event no one expected would become the decisive turning point for a chosen soul. It happened as the court was tense over an important case in which Saint Alphonsus stood on the side of an influential family, placing complete trust in his own argument. He studied the file thoroughly, compared every piece of evidence as usual, and with the confidence of a young lawyer who had won more than 30 consecutive cases, he entered the courtroom as someone certain of victory. Yet, in that seemingly familiar moment, a detail hidden from him changed the entire judgment. The truth was distorted by secret forces, and the verdict shifted to the opposing side. Saint Alphonsus stood silent, not because he lost the case, but because he saw the limitation of the very system he had trusted. The whispers in the courtroom, the confused looks of his colleagues, and the sound of the judge's gavel rang like an echo, striking directly into his soul. Something broke in that silence. As he stepped out of the courthouse, Naples remained as crowded as ever, but in his mind, all sounds receded. The clatter of horses on the road, the shouts of vendors at market stalls, even the breeze from the sea seemed to fade. He walked slowly through the streets, sensing an emptiness expanding within. It was not the disappointment of someone defeated, but the realization that fame is fragile. Every compliment he had received, every admiring look that once lit his path, grew dim under the light of the truth God wanted to show him. That night, in the quiet room of his family home, Saint Alphonsus sat at his writing desk, slowly folding the documents of the case. The candlelight flickered across his contemplative face. His eyes no longer held the pride of a courtroom prodigy, but the gaze of someone about to step into another world. A phrase rose within him, like a call from the depths. The world is vanity. He felt it clearly, sensed that he had spent too many years chasing a goal unworthy of his soul. In the weeks that followed, Saint Alphonsus lived through an inner struggle. He looked back on his brilliant youth, not with pride, but with the awareness that those achievements had led him to a crossroads. He prayed longer, moved among the churches of Naples with the slow breath of a man searching for God's will. He often stood for long periods before the Blessed Sacrament, saying nothing, letting his heart grow still enough to hear what the intellect could not answer. One evening, after many days of discernment, Saint Alphonsus made a decision that shocked the entire city. He announced his resignation from the legal profession, ending the path many believed he had been born to follow. Colleagues were stunned, his family anxious, outsiders whispered. Yet in his soul, it was the moment he found the truth he had long desired. He did not leave the courtroom because of defeat, but because he recognized that God had called him to another mission, deeper and eternal. The day he left the court for the last time, Naples seemed to sink into a somber sunset. The shimmering light on the sea appeared softer, and the saint's shadow stretched across the stone road like a path leading into unfamiliar land. In silence, he walked, carrying not law books, but a soul released from the burden of worldly prestige. The moment Saint Alphonsus decided to become a priest did not unfold with trumpets or radiant glory. It happened in the silence of a heart that had learned the highest path of knowledge is when the intellect bows before the mystery of God. He enrolled in the seminary with the humility of someone beginning anew, not to study human law, but to learn the teaching of the one who created the soul. From the light of intellect into the light of the Word of God, his life moved as dawn gives way to a deeper and holier brightness. It was the moment the true life of Saint Alphonsus began, no longer confined to cold stone courts, but opening onto the fields of mission where God desired him to become an instrument of mercy. That collapse, viewed from the outside, seemed like a failure of youth, but through the eyes of faith, it was a magnificent beginning where a genius realized that knowledge reaches fulfillment only when illuminated by the love of God. A new chapter opened, and the priestly path became the place where Saint Alphonsus stepped forward with humility, zeal, and the longing to reclaim an unfading truth. Before the next part, I wish to add a small note. This channel was founded for those who cherish the saints and want to contemplate and practice the spiritual treasures they entrusted to us. If you care about these themes, subscribe and activate the notification bell so you do not miss a video. May the grace of God, through the prayers of the saints, be abundantly poured upon all who have liked this video. Thank you very much. Now, without delay, let us enter the main part. After the turning point of leaving the legal profession and entering the path of priesthood, the life of Saint Alphonsus Maria de Liguori seemed to be placed in a new realm of light. This light was not as radiant as the courtroom victories of earlier years, but quietly spread across the outskirts of Naples, where abandoned souls lived in poverty and oblivion. It was the moment when God led him away from the wealthy centers and onto small dirt paths, into secluded villages where the voice of the gospel had scarcely ever been heard. And it was there that a vast mission began. Saint Alphonsus encountered the poor in circumstances that few wished to see. He saw families living on the edges of the city, weary fishermen, laborers worn by hardship, and souls wounded by a lack of pastoral care. This encounter did not happen in a single moment, but over many visits to rural areas where he witnessed children who did not know how to pray, the elderly who were left without confession, and the dying who had no priest arrive in time. These lives resembled a voiceless cry rising from fragile hearts, searching for God in the darkness of poverty. He did not see only material deprivation, but sensed the spiritual emptiness clinging to each face. Each time he walked past the small homes, Saint Alphonsus recognized that the teachings of the gospel needed to reach these places. In prayer, he felt as though he were being called to become a shepherd for those whose hope was fading. And from these encounters, a mission took shape, not from theory but from compassion lit by the hand of God. One of the bright points noted by many witnesses in the pastoral life of Saint Alphonsus was his gift of interior discernment, especially when he heard the confessions of those who had wandered astray. People recounted that when a penitent approached with a heart weighed down by sin, Saint Alphonsus knew how to help them open their hearts in peace. He could recognize spiritual wounds that they themselves could not express. Sometimes, with only a gentle sentence or a simple suggestion, he led them into a state of deep contrition, helping them feel the light of mercy. Many entered the confessional in anxiety, but emerged with brighter eyes. It was the humility, kindness, and understanding of Saint Alphonsus that became a place where souls found consolation again. Witnesses recounted that once he perceived the hidden bitterness within someone withdrawn in sin, and after a time of spiritual conversation, that person suddenly wept because they felt the love of God. This was not a supernatural miracle in the ordinary sense, but a miracle of mercy, where the heart of a shepherd became an instrument guided by the Holy Spirit. In this context, the year 1732 became a milestone. At Scala, a small town on the hills south of Naples, Saint Alphonsus and his spiritual companions founded the Congregation of the Most Holy Redeemer. The congregation was established with a clear mission to proclaim the gospel to the poor and abandoned. This was not a slogan, but a lived spirituality. Saint Alphonsus wanted his congregation to seek out places that few cared about, remote villages, small communities where people lived in both material and spiritual deprivation. The birth of the Congregation of the Most Holy Redeemer was like a fresh wind blowing into the life of the Church. Young religious gathered around Saint Alphonsus with fervent hearts, ready to travel long distances to preach missions of renewal. They lived among the poor, sharing daily meals, worries, and prayers. In their eyes, Saint Alphonsus was not only the founder but also the teacher, leading them to follow Jesus with a tender heart. The missions preached by Saint Alphonsus became events with transformative power. People from surrounding regions flocked in, not to hear an orator, but to meet someone who spoke to them in the language of the heart. During these missions, Saint Alphonsus let his gentle gaze fall upon weary faces, his voice resonating warmly, carrying the echo of the Word of God into every home and every life. Listeners felt that he was not standing above them to teach, but bending down to lift them. Many families were reconciled after attending these missions, and some had dived far from the church for many years and suddenly felt their hearts awakened. Young people rediscovered direction, and the elderly were comforted as death drew near. And in every mission, Saint Alphonsus always made time for the poorest. He met them in silence, listened without haste, and led them back to God with a steady and peaceful faith. This mission spread not because of grandeur, but because of the pastoral presence of Saint Alphonsus. He approached the poor not as a superior approaching inferiors, but as an older brother approaching younger siblings who had lost their way. This gentleness became the hallmark of the Congregation of the Most Holy Redeemer, a congregation born from the heart of mercy. Looking back on those years, it becomes clear that the encounter with the poor was where Saint Alphonsus found the deepest truth of his priestly mission. A truth not found in courtrooms or in philosophies, but in the tears of those who discovered they were loved and in the prayers rising from humble homes. And through this, the pastoral life of Saint Alphonsus became a testimony to an enduring truth. When a shepherd lives with the heart of Jesus, every soul can be led back to the source of light. After the years spent carrying out his mission among the poor and laying the foundation for the Congregation of the Most Holy Redeemer, the journey of Saint Alphonsus Maria de Liguori entered a new phase in which the light of his holiness unfolded more deeply. In 1762, though his health had begun to decline, he was appointed by the Church as Bishop of the Diocese of Sant'Agata dei Goti. That decision not only placed him as the shepherd of a diocese in turmoil, but also ended a new chapter in his spiritual life, where holiness became the center of his entire mission. Sant'Agata dei Goti at that time was spiritually dry and lacking direction in pastoral life. Many priests were poorly formed, community life had lost vitality, and the faithful were confused by the currents of the age. Into that context, Saint Alphonsus entered like a small but steady flame. He renewed the celebration of the sacraments, restored reverence in the liturgy, and invited the faithful to place the Eucharist at the heart of their lives. He revived times of adoration, reintroduced catechism classes, and guided young seminarians in a spirit of prayer and humility. All these efforts formed a tapestry of restoration, where the Church was led back to the source of its spiritual life. Yet the presence of Saint Alphonsus was not only organizational, but also radiated an interior strength difficult to describe. Many in the diocese recounted that when he celebrated Mass, the atmosphere of the church changed as if wrapped in a cloak of silence. His voice was calm and reverent, and his gaze upon the Blessed Sacrament seemed to rest on a reality beyond what human eyes could perceive. People came to him not merely because he was their bishop, but because something in him stirred their hearts, as though God were quietly planting in them a deep peace. Numerous witnesses recalled that Saint Alphonsus sometimes entered ecstasy while praying. In those moments his face seemed to brighten, his breath slowed, and his heart appeared to melt into the mysterious presence surrounding him. Those standing near felt a sacred stillness covering the space, not dramatic, but flowing into every breath of the prayer. There were times he knelt before the Eucharist for so long that time itself seemed to pause. In that silence, people saw in him the mark of a soul held in God's embrace. More than once, those who came to confession or sought spiritual direction experienced a profound transformation. They felt that Saint Alphonsus listened not only with his ears, but with his heart. He understood the pain they carried and recognized wounds they had not dared to reveal. His presence resembled a gentle breeze touching their souls, drawing them closer to the mercy of God. Some said that after leaving a conversation with him, they felt a peace they had never found elsewhere. However, the spiritual life of Saint Alphonsus was not revealed only through supernatural states, but was also marked by the writings he left behind. During his years as bishop, he completed many major works, most notably the Glories of Mary and the Practice of the Love of Jesus Christ. These two works served as pillars of his spirituality. One expressed his love for Mary, guiding souls into the tender arms of the Heavenly Mother. The other expressed his love for Jesus, inviting people to live in union with him through every small action. The Glories of Mary was written not only with theological insight, but with the depth of prayer and a profound devotion. Through each page, Saint Alphonsus honored the role of Mary in salvation history, portraying her as a refuge for fragile souls and a bridge leading them to Jesus. The work spread widely, and many priests, religious and laypeople regarded it as a cherished book. Meanwhile, the Practice of the Love of Jesus Christ summarized the spirituality Saint Alphonsus pursued all his life. He presented love for Christ not as a fleeting emotion, but as the path of a heart seeking to live fully in his light. The teachings in that work carried a spiritual beauty, as though written in the intimate union between him and Jesus in the Eucharist. It is impossible not to mention Moral Theology, the masterpiece into which Saint Alphonsus poured his intellectual ability and pastoral experience. This work offered the Church a balanced direction, helping to discern between strictness and compassion. Through it, he was honored as the Doctor of Mercy, a title given to one who understood that truth and mercy must always walk together. For Saint Alphonsus, Christian morality was not a set of terms, but a path leading souls closer to God. During his years as bishop, the health of Saint Alphonsus clearly declined. His body bore many ailments that made movement difficult. Yet despite the pain, he dedicated all his time to prayer, writing, and guiding the faithful. People saw him seated on an old wooden chair, leaning over his desk, his hand trembling from age but still writing lines filled with love for God and for souls. Wherever he was, whether in strength or in sickness, on sunny days or rainy ones, the presence of Saint Alphonsus carried a serene holiness. In him, many people saw a shepherd who placed Jesus above all, a teacher who listened, and a soul God used to awaken faith in a diocese longing for light. The supernatural signs in his life of prayer did not reveal him, but revealed God's compassion through him. Looking back on this period, one sees an episcopal life measured not only by pastoral work, but also by contemplative presence, moments of ecstasy, and the writings that supported the Church for generations. Saint Alphonsus became a symbol of deep spiritual life, where every movement of his being turned toward God and toward the souls who needed to be led into the light. As the pastoral light in Sant'Agata dei Goti gradually settled into steadiness, the life of Saint Alphonsus Maria de Liguori entered a long twilight, where the body weakened, but the soul shone with a holiness difficult to describe. In the last 18 years of his life, he endured the severe trials of old age and illness, like a quiet passage crafted by God for those he loves. The body of Saint Alphonsus was tormented by persistent pain. His spine became misaligned, causing his back to bend, his frame to shrink, and his eyes to grow dim until he could barely see. Every step became a challenge, every movement a touch on the peak of suffering. Yet, within these very limits, people saw the light of a soul being purified by God. No one could fully grasp the pain Saint Alphonsus carried. The body that had once been strong during the years of missions now grew frail, but his eyes shone more clearly than ever. In the early mornings, he sat quietly in his familiar wooden chair, his hands trembling from age, yet his heart steady in union with the suffering Christ. Those who visited him felt the peace radiating from his aged face. Illness did not close him in, but opened him more deeply to the mystery of the cross. It was remarkable that in this very period, his greatest works were written. It was as if God transformed pain into light to guide the church. These pages were not written in the comfort of health, but with heavy breaths and sleepless nights of aching. Yet every word carried theological strength and spiritual experience. Each line seemed distilled from tears, becoming a source of nourishment for countless souls. These works were not merely knowledge, but testimony from a heart tested in love. He often said that God leads the faithful close to him through two paths, consolation and trial is the path to intimacy. Seeing Saint Alphonsus in his final years, people understood the truth of that statement. He accepted every pain in the silence of one who knew Christ had gone before him. There was no complaint, no bitterness, only the steady breathing of a heart, gradually blending with the rhythm of the Sacred Heart. That silence spread like a living homily, more powerful than any sermon he had delivered as priest or bishop. In the most painful moments, those close to him saw Saint Alphonsus close his eyes for a long time. They said that at times he seemed to be looking at something beyond human sight. On sea, he whispered a prayer, not asking to be healed, but asking to love God within suffering. This was the deepest point of the spirituality of the cross, where a person does not seek to escape trial, but finds spiritual meaning in every moment. The Redemptorist brothers often sat beside him in the afternoons. They recounted how Saint Alphonsus would pause for a long time before the crucifix, his gaze seeming to merge with the merciful eyes of Christ. That union was not loud, but the quiet offering of one who had given every drop of suffering to console the heart of Jesus. Those who witnessed it felt as though they were standing before a wordless mass, where the offering was the weary body of the shepherd. By the year 1787, the candle of his life began to close. Saint Alphonsus died in peace, gentle as the final breath of one who had completed his offering. He passed away at the age of 90, after a long life lived in service and love. For those who cherished him, his death was not an end, but the return of a soul refined through the fire of trial. The room where he breathed his last was filled with the soft light of the afternoon, as if heaven and earth bowed to farewell a saint. Looking back on the final years of Saint Alphonsus, one sees a profound lesson in fidelity. He showed the world that the cross is not a sign of defeat, but the path to light. Through his life of illness, he proved that holiness does not lie in strength, but in the complete union of the soul with God. And in the very exhaustion of his body, God wrote the most precious legacy of Saint Alphonsus, a legacy that lives on in the history of the Church and in the hearts of those seeking peace in God. When Saint Alphonsus Maria de Liguori drew his final breath in 1787, the atmosphere in the community of Scala and within the congregation of the Most Holy Redeemer sank into a sacred silence. The room where he rested still bore traces of the days of illness, but in that moment, the suffering was gone. What remained was the peaceful face of a shepherd who had lived his vocation to the very end, for the poor and the weary in soul. Yet death did not close his path of holiness. Instead, like the sun setting only to reveal another brightness, the life of Saint Alphonsus entered a phase of even greater radiance in the history of the Church. Not long after his burial, the stream of people coming to his tomb grew daily. Many came to pray with simple faith, bringing hidden sorrows they did not know where else to take. Amid those prayers, strange signs began to appear. People recounted that some who were ill felt relief in their bodies after kneeling at his tomb. Others who had carried long-standing inner turmoil found peace in an unexpected way. A number who had lived far from the Church returned after asking for the intercession of Saint Alphonsus. The Redemptorist priests recorded these stories with care and gratitude. They did not seek sensational accounts, but they recognized that God was confirming the fidelity of his servant through the graces bestowed upon his people. Gradually, official testimonies were documented and submitted to the Church, forming the foundation for the process of beatification. In 1816, nearly 3 decades after the death of Saint Alphonsus, Pope Pius VII declared him blessed. That ceremony was not only an honor for a holy life, but also the Church's recognition of the miracles worked through his intercession. For the Church, it was a clear sign that the life of Saint Alphonsus continued to bear fruit even after he left this world. As miracles continued, devotion to him spread not only within religious communities, but also among the faithful throughout Italy. For them, Saint Alphonsus was not a distant saint from ancient books, but a spiritual father who understood human suffering, for he himself had endured its deepest forms. They sought him as a refuge where mercy could be touched with tenderness and the light of the gospel. In 1839, Pope Pius VII issued the decree of canonization for Saint Alphonsus. This recognition marked the Church's official acknowledgement of him as a model of Christian life. The canonization ceremony unfolded with hymns and prayers, a song of thanksgiving to God for a life lived fully in love and service. Yet the honors did not end there. In 1871, Pope Pius IX declared him a Doctor of the Church, naming him the Doctor of Christian Morality. This title came not only from the words he left behind, but from the pastoral life refined through suffering. In the spirituality of Saint Alphonsus, truth and mercy are not opposed but turn toward each other like 2 sources of light in the same sky. His work, Moral Theology, became the compass, guiding the Church toward balance during turbulent times. Afterward, the influence of Saint Alphonsus continued to spread through the congregation of the Most Holy Redeemer. The order he founded with love for the poor, beating in rhythm with the heart of Jesus, grew rapidly. From Italy, the Redemptorists traveled across Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Today, the congregation is present in more than 80 countries, carrying its spirituality to places in need of the gospel's light. Each time a Redemptorist enters a distant village or preaches to the suffering, the legacy of Saint Alphonsus lives anew. Looking back on what unfolded after Saint Alphonsus returned to God, one sees that holiness does not end with a single lifetime, but continues to spread across generations. Healings, conversions, souls rediscovering hope, all become notes in the hymn of thanksgiving God writes in history. The radiance of Saint Alphonsus did not fade when the sun of his earthly life set, but continued to shine like a new dawn, guiding people toward the eternal mercy of God. When the 90-year journey of Saint Alphonsus Maria de Liguori came to a close, his life appeared as a continuous stream of light from Naples to eternity. Each stage, from his radiant youth to the profound years of pastoral ministry and the period of illness at the end of his life, bore the mark of the quiet guidance God extended to his faithful servant. Looking back, one does not see broken lines, but a hymn of offering, where every light and every trial were joined into a single flow of grace that never ceased. The legacy of Saint Alphonsus continues to live in the heart of the Church like a guiding lamp. His moral thought, crystallized in moral theology, helps pastors discern between mercy and truth. His love for the Eucharist nurtures the prayer life of countless generations of the faithful. His deep trust in Mary, expressed in the Glories of Mary, has become a refuge for weary souls seeking peace. These fruits follow one another like the beats of a heart still alive within the Church today. The call from the life of Saint Alphonsus rises softly yet clearly. Learn from him gentleness toward the lost, courage in truth, and love that never grows tired of the poor. He reminds the faithful that holiness does not come from extraordinary deeds, but from small and steady steps toward God each day. Saint Alphonsus Maria de Liguori, in this moment of silence, I come before you with the heart of a believer, searching for spiritual breath amid the burdens of life. The light of your life, from the poor streets of Naples to the pages that have enlightened humanity, is leading me into a realm of peace I have long sought. May this prayer rise like gentle incense, like thanksgiving and supplication offered in the humility of a small soul. O Saint, you once journeyed across the outskirts of life, bringing the gospel to forgotten hearts. I offer you my plea for the missionaries of today, those who continue your steps across distant lands, among poor communities, and within cultures that have not yet known the light of God. Please keep them in peace, support them in every trial, and kindle in them the flame of love that endures through hardship. May missionaries find strength in the Eucharist, the unfailing spring that nourishes their souls. May they have gentle hearts when they meet the weak, patience when facing barren places, and courage when entering the dark regions of the world. May they feel your companionship, so that when they grow weary, they may know that a saint once carried the same burden with them in the love of Jesus. Saint Alphonsus, I also offer you my own faith. There are days when faith feels light as breath, and days when it feels heavy like a stone upon my shoulders. There are moments when I sense God is near, and moments when I walk with an empty heart. I ask you to pray that my faith remain firm, so that amid the trials of life I may always look to God as my only anchor. Grant me a heart that listens, to perceive God's voice in even the smallest events. Teach me to live in truth and mercy, the very message you spent your life proclaiming. Help me rediscover the beauty of prayer, so that each day I may return to the heart of Christ, where every fear is dissolved and every wound healed. Teach me to love the Eucharist, so that each time I approach the altar, I may step into the very source of the soul's life. Gentle Saint, please also pray for the Church today, that every member may live their vocation in joy and humility. Illuminate priests, religious, and all who serve, that their faith may be guarded and nourished by the love of God. May every Catholic family place God at the center, so that the flame of faith may burn in the light of unity. In this quiet moment, I place everything in your hands. Saint Alphonsus, lead me closer to the heart of Jesus, so that I may live each day with humility, love, and trust. Amen. I offer my blessing to all brothers and sisters who have liked this video. May God, through the intercession of the saints, grant you peace, health, and abundant grace in your lives. Return to the tabernacle, return to the light of the Blessed Sacrament, return to the silent companionship of the one who waits for us in the sacrament of love. And if in what I have shared today you find even 1 or 2 sentences that touch your soul and help you draw closer to God, then I am fulfilled.